That short, very, very short first reading that we heard today invites us into just the tip of the iceberg of the story of Abram and Sarai, better known by their secondary names, Abraham and Sarah. The promises we heard today are the ones that echo through billions of people of faith. Promises of a great nation, of a need to follow, and the willingness to be called, unite our tradition with our Islamic and Jewish neighbors, as well as those across the Christian spectrum. So these beginning words of Abram are integral to much of the world. And as we continue to celebrate their place in our tradition, as we seek to find some meaning within them, we are united with a world in need of compassion and care, in need of our willingness to be called right along with Abram today. So what has God asked of Abram? What does God ask of you and of me? God asks that we allow change to unfold within our lives, not only in our physical environment, but more importantly within our conscious awareness. It's not just the willingness to accept that change is present, but to accept that change is a part of our story. When we are invited into changing environments, we can refuse, we can accept, we can adapt. This week, I was in a webinar on the face of the church, specifically about how to use the multitude of church buildings around the country to bring life to the church's mission. The presenter spoke to different ways of viewing the building as the poorhouse, one that is too late to be saved, the clubhouse, where the building is used for the activities of the church club alone, and the lighthouse, where the building is what serves to shine God's light out into the world, a place where love and opportunity are in good supply. Back 100 years or more ago, I believe that's what all church builders saw in their building, in their architecture, in their spaces. A place that was shining out God's vision of wholeness. Life, we know, has changed, and the way we gather has changed too. Often, that means the intended uses of so many spaces leaves them empty today. That's why I think so many church builders have, in recent years, advocated for more open space, rather than specialized in these recent decades. When more people attend fitness classes than worship gatherings, and some of those fitness classes are sometimes more of a spiritual experience than many worship gatherings, what should those of us with buildings do? Change has been coming for decades. Change has been with us for millennia. Beyond its social and personal uses, the church has a divine calling. Abram had a divine calling that we hear today. He is a blessing not because of his own skill, but because he is used to reflect God's light. He is that lighthouse. The church is called to be the blessing to the nations, not because it is perfect and faultless, but because it reflects God who is. The story of Abram's call reminds us of the constancy of change that's part of living with faith. But we have to continue to figure out what it is we are risking and what our promised rewards might also be. Later on in the stories of Abraham's descendants and of Moses, there are times, well, and even Abram himself, there are times where questions enter that call to follow. God says, go, and everybody says, hold on. But it's important to remember that this morning, this is not one of those times. The story of Abram is told as clear and unequivocal as possible. He doesn't even have to respond. He just goes. Because Genesis was written as a word of hope for the exilic people of Israel, a definitive statement of yes was needed for them. While we typically imagine these primal people as their own stories, these direct descendants of creation, of Abram, of Noah, are so removed from known history that what historians tell us is that these texts come from the same time as so many others, the time of exile in Babylon for the Israelite people. A people who are torn by war and oppression, who are taken from homelands that even then were not even original. This story was meant to speak to those who knew that returning meant leaving behind the stability achieved in Babylon. In exile, they felt stable. In trauma, in pain, they felt stable. And it was far from a safe bet, but what this text reminds us is that it was worth taking. When they doubted, they could turn to Abram and remember that the family of faith has endured before and begun the journey anyway, and so we can do it too. Our faith is a faith of wanderers and exiled people. So it has an incredible story to tell to those who wander, to those who experience exile. When we wander, we know that there is still a home in God. When we are isolated in our exile, we know that God invited people to go into the new in hope of pushing past those boundaries. When we are at the crossroads, divining the path, our story tells us God was at that crossroad alongside us and departs with us. We find that the risk is worth it. We learn to trust the rewards of God, even when we can't see them concrete before us. This story is also a reminder that the journey is long and might just be starting. Similar to the slaves who left Egypt, the exiles who returned from Babylon, and God's dispersed people who returned to Israel, and people throughout the diaspora who have continued to journey. We could, as Martin Luther King Jr. himself said, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that we as a people will get to the promised land." Abram is offered the opportunity to find the promised land. And what is unique about his story is that he will continue beyond it. To reach the promised land may take more time than we're ready for, more than one generation, but it's our duty to begin the journey. There is a dancer I have come across many times on social media, Eric Hernandez. He's a native of a North Carolina tribe who performs the hoop dance with incredible skill, even for Cirque du Soleil before COVID canceled his tours. And throughout his media, through his dancing, he tells the story of many important animals and concepts of life. As he dances, the hoops transition with the beat of the drum from an eagle to a globe spinning to a snake, and so on. He has said that the hoop dance allows dancers to weave stories of how all life is connected with changes and transitions. The dance itself began to tell visual stories through the creation of ever-changing discernible symbols. It is only through the change, then, that the story can be told. The visual artistry of the changing hoops, the stories told, leave gaps, spaces for his individuality, for his personality to shine through, while speaking to a larger truth, much the same way Abram's story makes space for a longer narrative, a generation-spanning travel journal and history lesson. And this is what the church must continue to be open to as well. The story cannot be told without change, and there are divine, awesome spaces within that for our personality to shine out from this little church in the middle of Hummesltown. For any church, no matter where they're located, to weave tradition into our constant companion of transition. God has not given up. Even throughout all the suffering and second-guessing that makes up the previous chapters of Genesis, and here in this moment, God continues to go forward, calls Abram out, and calls him to move, to go. God takes up a new tactic in him. Rather than offering punishments and curses, God offers blessing, hoping to move the people with goodwill and kindness. This is the same tactic we use today to encourage people in the story of God. We cannot push forward a God of retribution and guilt any longer because we as humans have swallowed that pain for too long until it has been eternalized and internalized and isolated. God didn't call Abram into loneliness, but to create blessing and multi-generational connections in the world. We cannot live in theologies of regret and guilt because it doesn't serve our God, who proves over and over again that respect and support is more important than anything else we can offer. The stories of Genesis remind us that God cannot quit altogether on the broken creation. We can claim our brokenness. We must claim our brokenness and have patience with ourselves. God has called and will always call the brokenhearted by injustice, the broken-spirited by exhaustion. God does not always call those with the best credentials or the shining pedigrees. God calls the broken. We see again and again that a faithful response to God's leading results in a blessing of gifts and talents, of new learned skills, ready for the task that the church is called to leave the comfort of the known for the promise of the unknown. God offers us a story of an origin, of a birth story, and of the ongoing journey ahead of us. In the circle, the hoop, the journey of now, we tell a tale of readiness to go forward, a readiness to be sent. God has called us onto the journey. God has called generations onto the journey. And God has prepared us for change by leading us into leaders and icons and histories and stories of people who looked at the world, made note of its connections, and danced among them for us to remember them. The lighthouse of the church shines a more perfect blessing upon the world with each new day, with each one of us who joins the call, who speaks up with a new intensity, conviction, or vulnerability. Go from what you know. This is what Abram is told. Go from family and certainty, and I will make of you a blessing, a wider family, a new creation, filled with original and enduring blessings. Go from what you know and be changed. Amen.